Welcome to the Recovery.com podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mala, and today I'm thrilled to welcome Jen Scott. Jen, it's an honor to talk with you today. Welcome.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
All right, so let's jump right in. I know you've got so much to share, and I'm so thankful that you're willing to share it. Would you be able to share your background and then give us some insight as to what led you to the recovery path?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm Jen. I am an Indigenous woman and Jesus follower, and I am a wife to a gentle and kind man. And I have three daughters, one who is 15 years old, one who is 2 years old, and one that's 10 months old. And I'm a storyteller, I'm a healer, I'm a cycle breaker, and I have my bachelor's in business administration with a focus in management and an addiction studies technical diploma. And currently pursuing a master's in business administration that leads into a doctorate of business administration, focusing on organizational development. I have five siblings, three from my mom's side and two from my dad's side. And some insight that led to the recovery journey is really focusing on being a cycle breaker in my family. There's been a lot of mental health conditions that, like anxiety and depression that comes from intergenerational and historical trauma. Yeah, that really jump started that recovery journey of just like a spiritual experience that I had
Sure.
with Christianity.
Yeah, I definitely want to dive into that more. So maybe a good place to start would be early challenges. What did you face early on, and what was that journey? How did you overcome them? What did that look like?
So, early challenges would be growing up with complex trauma in the household. That I lived with my mother for the school year, and then in the summer, we would go visit, summer and Christmas breaks, we would go visit my dad, who he was in the military, so he would live in different places like Michigan and Wisconsin. But my primary care person was my mother, and she struggled with mental health, with depression and anxiety and other things. And so things that she experienced really dove into really affected and impacted the next generation, which is myself and my two brothers and my sister that lived with her.
Mm,
Early challenges would be when you're living with a person who has a high ACE score, so adverse childhood experiences, as a caregiver, that really affects the next generation. So, like depression, it was really hard for her to have the self confidence given trauma that she experienced in the previous generation with her caretakers,
mhm,
which were her siblings because her parents died young
mm,
due to health issues. Just like her going through depression and not being able to hold a job and have fear that like somebody's like out to get us
yeah,
and stuff that goes into the indigenous community of, that was an actual fear due to colonialism and other historical trauma. So like those have been passed down biologically and affected my mom and what she was able to do for her kids. And so begging my mom to like get out of bed, even though, she was depressed and stuff, I didn't understand as a child
yeah,
that was depression. And so the early challenges would be just like growing up with a primary care provider who experienced a lot of trauma herself and didn't know how to react to stress
hmm,
in a way that was positive. So those protective factors weren't there for her as a child. So whenever she got stressed, that was taken out on us in unhealthy ways. And then the not having motivation to keep a house clean, hygienic, not being able to hold a job. So we grew up in poverty. We had holes in our floor
mhm,
and didn't have running water sometimes. And oftentimes my brother and I had to steal to just have the basic necessities. And so like growing up not knowing like what integrity really is unless like we saw it from other people and wanting to aspire to be a person of integrity, because that's in all of us, but
Mhm.
we just didn't have the ability to do so as children.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are just some of like the early challenges that I faced.
Yeah. Yeah. How was your cultural heritage a part of the entire picture? How did it influence your approach in the moment while you were going through anything, if at all? And then how
Yeah.
did it influence your approach to healing and recovery?
Culturally, my mom didn't really indulge in our culture.
Mhm.
So the only cultural things that I had was like whenever our tribal affiliation, because we're members of these people look like me, because I was living in a small town in Georgia where there wasn't a lot of people that looked like me.
Mhm.
And so it was just like really informative to like open this and be like, oh, these people look like me and they're speaking a different language. What is this? And I always had like a huge interest in it. But when I would ask my mom, she wouldn't know how to respond or like what to do about it. So I didn't really get involved more into indulging into my culture until I started going to college,
Mm.
where I was able to apply for scholarships through my tribal affiliation. This is so smart. They require you to learn about your culture
Yeah.
and everything like that to because we're really trying to like help the next generation with language revitalization and like keeping our culture and stuff. So when I applied for scholarships, that's when I went to college, I was able to learn more about that. I come from a lineage of single moms, including myself. I was a single mom because my great grandma lived in Kotzebue on the reservation.
Mhm.
And these are stories that my auntie has told me because my mom won't talk about the past at all.
Mm.
So, like, these are stories my auntie told me that my great grandma lived in Kotzebue
Mhm.
on the reservation, and she would come into the interior of Fairbanks
Mhm.
and desire a life outside of the reservation.
Mm.
And she did have two kids there when she lived in Kotzebue. And she ended up meeting a man in Fairbanks and leaving her two children to be taken care of by her parents to move with this man in the interior outside of the reservation
Yeah.
and like start a new life. And so they got married and have had a lot more kids, but then ended up dying earlier in age
Mm.
due to health issues and left. I think my mom had like nine siblings. So she was the youngest
Yeah.
and they raised her off of like welfare. And so that like created a lot of trauma. There were people in and out of the house of, teenagers throwing parties and stuff like that.
Right.
And then my aunt just said that my mom did not have a good life
Mm.
growing up and there was a lot of trauma. So that's all I know from that. And that's okay because if my mom doesn't want to share, that is okay.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of compassion there, just knowing that she has a really high ACE score. Yeah. So she lived in Fairbanks for a long time and she met my dad because he was in the military and they got married and moved to Georgia
Mm.
for military reasons and then got divorced when I was 2 years old.
Mm.
And then I stayed with my mom in Georgia.
Mhm. Gotcha, gotcha. So there was always a sense of survival that was just
Yeah.
ingrained, and of course, like you said, is generations of women carrying
Mhm.
that burden and trying to just make it, survive, and it's impacted you. It's impacted you. I can hear that, I can see that. So as a mother and a wife, how have your personal experiences shaped how you support your family, yourself through those challenges that you face?
Yeah, there's always that survivor mentality of adaptation.
Mhm.
So, Indigenous people have had to adapt constantly since the first people came over.
Yeah.
We've just had to really adapt and just be in survival mode constantly. And so that really does something on a nervous system of like constantly adapting to please people to survive is really extremely hard because we can't be authentically ourselves then.
Mm.
Everybody should have the ability to be authentically themselves because those are the gifts that we bring to the world and to the land and to other people to help build that community. If we're always in survival mode and people pleasing and adapting, that's not doing service to anybody. And so, something that we're learning in my family now and we're currently practicing is learning to be authentically ourselves. So, whenever there's challenges that come to our family, I'm like encouraging those emotions to come out and like voicing, hey, these things are happening, or I'm having these thoughts. Let's work through them. So, really, just letting my daughters know that they can take up space, even down to, or when my 2 year old started walking
Mhm.
and she would be walking down the halls or something, I would never grab her and take her to get out of the way of people, because I'm trying to teach her you can take up space and you are here
Mm,
and you are important. So, just like even little things like that that we can do to help with mental health and authenticity is just like not shying away and just like trying to hide in a corner, because that's what happened, in the residential schools when people would come to the reservations and kidnap the children, the indigenous children, and take them to these boarding schools and cut their beautiful black hair off and just make them try to be these little copies of other people.
right.
That goes with the historical trauma of just like we just need to be able to be ourselves and be storytellers, take up space. And so I think one of the biggest things that I'm teaching my daughters is to use their voices
Yeah.
and let me know, like, hey, I'm not okay, or because I had a high ACE score,
Hmm.
I have these tendencies to be controlling
Hmm.
and like all these things. So I've like told my daughter, like, tell me if I'm being controlling. You have 100% permission to voice how you're feeling and anything like that. So there's been times where she's like, Mom, you're being controlling. Please stop. Or Mom, don't talk to me this way. And that has been really healing for her and for myself, because I just get so excited when she says those things. Sometimes I'm like, right away. But then I'm like, I get so excited because I'm like, you know what? This is cycle breaking.
Hmm.
This is healing. This is recovery.
Yeah.
My daughter's having a voice and saying, no more. This is done.
Mm.
Telling darkness to go away
Yeah.
and being light.
That is phenomenal and such a good lesson. I think, like we all are recovering from something. So
Mhm.
when we get to that position where we're with our children, and I can relate to this too, having four as well, like there's a moment where you're sitting there and you can hear it. I don't know about you, but I can hear it in myself where I'm just like, oh, that is controlling because that inclination to protect is there, and you're thinking that it's going to help shelter them, but they have their ability, especially as they're getting older, and we've empowered them in so many ways as parents, like to let them shine with that and to be able to just encourage that healthy back and forth, right? Means sometimes that you as a parent have to breathe a little bit, let go of that control, and know that you can have safely that back and forth and that conversation so that you can even receive. And this is kudos to you. You're receiving what she's saying, right? And
Yes.
that's a huge step in the whole thing because if you can't receive what they're saying, then you're not going to be able to have that back and forth. So that is reflective of your own healing as well, I would say. And that's phenomenal. That's really, really good.
Yeah. And that goes back, I was just going to say that goes back to indigenous practices
Yeah.
of parenting and child rearing, is back before residential schools and stuff. Like indigenous people, they were doing gentle parenting.
Mhm.
They were doing this communication of back and forth with each other,
Mhm.
of parent and child. It wasn't meant to be parent
Right.
child and this is the way, like parent super authoritative. It wasn't meant to be that way. It was meant to be, hey, we all sit and we eat together and like we help each other like thrive. And that means using our voices
Yeah.
and letting each other know that we love each other and things like that, and being gentle with each other.
Yeah.
There wasn't the corporal, there wasn't that punishment of
Right.
like discipline with physical
Mhm.
violence,
Yeah.
stuff like that. So yeah, I think what I'm trying to do is really just do what comes natural
Mhm.
to me
Mhm.
instead of what people tell me
Right.
what I should do. I still co-sleep with my 10-month-old, and that just feels very natural to me. I'm just doing whatever feels natural, and that's what I'm seeing my children thrive in.
Yeah.
And when they're faced with challenges, they're doing what's natural to them and they're using their voice and they're connecting with the land, which is super powerful for recovery of just like if I have a trigger or I have a flashback, the first thing I do is cry
Yeah.
because that's a healthy outlet
Yeah.
of like I don't know why society tells us that crying is like not a good thing because as a believer, I believe my creator created us with emotions and created us with tears.
Mhm.
And I just remember trying to hold them back so much. And I felt, the creator like put on my heart that it's okay to cry. I gave you
Yeah.
tears. This is a healthy outlet. Because what I used to do is turn to drinking myself to drunkenness
Mhm.
4 times a week to try to numb that pain,
Mhm.
or go to gambling, or try to find love in multiple partners.
Mhm.
And none of that ever worked. But when I let that healthy cry come out
Mhm.
and I'm just like bawling, and my daughter walks in and sees that, she knows that's a healthy outlet for me. And it's okay to just let it all come out when that hurts come out. And she's practiced that as well now. And so trying to come up with healthy coping strategies of like crying, going for a run if I need to get that energy out, and remember that I'm strong and I'm capable and I'm resilient to keep going. Or if my mind feels like tangled from that flashback, it might take me a week to get through
Mhm.
that trigger or that flashback, but I have to do things like go get in nature
Mhm.
and be barefoot.
Yeah.
It's so cute because my daughters love being barefoot. They barely wear shoes.
Oh,
They're always connecting with the land. And
yeah.
last night, my daughter kept saying barefoot, barefoot, because like I was trying to put shoes on her because we were going to be on pavement, but she's like barefoot, barefoot, barefoot. So like it's just so important for us to connect with the land and feel the earth beneath us because it grounds us. We're connected. And
Right.
something that colonialism did is one of the main reasons why they looked at us as savages and all of these things is because we told them that we don't treat the land the way that you're treating it. We need to honor the land because the land gives to us and we take care of it. When the land started getting destroyed, that's where things started getting more messier and stuff like that. So, like, for Indigenous people to connect back to the land and try to protect it because it brings healing to us, we receive from it and we take care of it. It's a give and a take. And it's just so beautiful to be able to connect back to nature to bring that healing
Oh, yeah.
back to us.
We have research that shows us that being in nature is not only therapeutic, but also something as simple as being able to walk barefoot on the ground and connect to the earth that way actually helps with balancing out your circadian rhythms. And not to mention, just the natural hit of all things that feel good by connecting with the earth that way. It's so, so, so important and so healing. So I love that, and that's absolutely adorable that the kids are like barefoot. That's so great. You mentioned a few things like you ended up getting into some bad coping habits that obviously hurt you, and they took you in the opposite direction. What was a turning point? Where did you kind of hit that wall and go, okay, I can't do this anymore. I need the recovery. I need this. What is this going to look like for me? How did that look?
Yeah, so this is kind of where like children teach us things,
Mhm.
and we should honor our children. We shouldn't just be this authoritative person just trying to make them discipline, because they have so much to offer and teaching to us as well.
Yeah.
And so we just need to welcome that. So my turning point would be, almost 11 years ago, my daughter was 4, I just lost my job because I told my job that I was sick, but I was actually in Panama City, Florida, enjoying spring break with some friends. So I was like drunk on the beach every day.
Mm,
And so they had found out, and I didn't get fired, but she gave me an option
mm,
in a way. She was just like, hey, we know you lied. What do you want to do? And she was like, please do the right thing here.
mhm,
And so I was just like, all right, I'm going to give my notice. And so I was without a job. My daughter was 4 and she was in daycare. And I had just like hit rock bottom. I was gambling all my money away.
mm,
And I was just like, had multiple partners when I was out drinking. And so I was just like looking for love, like in all the wrong places
yeah,
because like I've never really experienced love built on trust and understanding and compassion.
mhm,
Sure, my parents loved me the best that they could, but there was always that broken of not being able to have it be built on trust.
mhm,
So it was always like, do you actually love me? What are these things? So, anyways, my daughter was 4 and I picked her up from daycare and I had this music playing with a bunch of profanity. And she said, Mom, can I ask you something without you getting mad? And I said, yes, of course. And she said, can we stop listening to this music? It's bad for my ears and it hurts God's heart.
oh,
And this is a 4-year-old.
my gosh, yeah,
It felt like everything stopped in time. And there was this spiritual experience of a vision of the past, which is me being the same age as my daughter, begging my mom to get out of bed, to play with me, to build a mud pie and do something, but she just couldn't. And then there was a vision of the present of my daughter just like wanting to play with me and stuff, but I was too occupied trying to numb my pain
mm,
and looking for love in everywhere possible. And then there was a vision of the future where she and I are like rolling around on a Saturday morning in our own apartment because I was living with my dad and I had like just gotten evicted from my apartment, a couple weeks before
mhm,
because I was gambling.
mm,
And so it was the vision of the future of this. We're just rolling around in bed and we're financially stable and there's peace in our house.
mm,
There's stability. The house is clean and like everything is just so beautiful. And it's her and I's relationship is so beautiful and built on trust and all of these things. So then I came back to reality and I said, of course. And then we got back to my dad's house and this 4-year-old, she went into the kitchen and made herself a peanut butter jelly sandwich. And then I went into the bathroom and I cried and I said, God, if you're real, please teach me how to be a good mom.
yeah,
And then I went into the daycare the next day, which is a Christian daycare that I sent her to only because they were the place that didn't have any abuse records
mm,
in Madison that I knew of.
mhm,
And so I went in and I told them about my spiritual experience, and they said they've been praying for me and they got me connected with the church.
uh,
And then I started going to church, and one of the first stories that was told really captured my heart. And it was the story of in the Bible where this woman is caught in adultery
mhm,
and she's brought before all of the religious leaders bring her before all these people in the community
mhm,
to stone her.
mhm,
And they ask Jesus, basically, like, what would you do in this? And he says, he who has not sinned can throw the first stone.
right, mhm,
And that really hit home to me on like, well, who is this Jesus?
mhm,
I've always thought of God as like somebody who just like would throw the stone and like all these things, but like Jesus is God. I don't know. So like this vision like came to me again, like a spiritual experience of just like me being that woman thrown unclothed on dirt
mhm,
for all the things that I've done in my past to just survive and all the things that I've done out of response to trauma.
mhm,
the people that I've hurt, myself, and I'm just thrown in front of all of these people, and people are holding stones, and people have thrown stones at me for the things that I've done. And but then there's Jesus who is like holding up an arm and saying no
Mhm.
more.
Mhm.
And he's saying no more to all the darkness. And I, for the first time in my life, I felt loved and protected. And that transformed my soul and my heart on just being like, this is a love that can be built on trust. But I have all of these gushing wounds that are just bleeding out on people and bleeding out on myself. And so that was just like a turning point in my life of realizing like I have to start this recovery journey. I feel like God is calling me to be a cycle breaker, but he has let me know just like that he created me to be loved and to love others.
Mhm.
And that is what I want to do. I've gotten to the point of knowing that I'm truly, deeply loved. And that overflows into me being able to love others and to genuinely love others. So, yeah, the recovery journey was really pursuing those open, gushing wounds
Mhm.
that was bleeding out and hurting people, like my daughter with my mental health issues and stuff. I would leave her to go party and things that affected her, and like not having stability and financial issues and drinking a lot constantly and stealing from my dad. I used to pawn his stuff to get money to gamble. So all of these things that I was doing to hurt people. So the first step was really tending to those gushing wounds. And then over 10 years, I'm finally to a place where I'm in my recovery journey. Most of those are bruises, and I'm able to really focus on being authentic so that I can thrive. And so my children can thrive, so my husband can thrive, and other people in the community can thrive.
Yeah. Some of those wounds, and we don't have to go into them unless you want to, but would you be willing to share what some of those big wounds were that led you down that path of thinking like I've got to fill this void, or having a void that you need to fill, that you tried to fill with the gambling, the drinking, all of it? What happened?
Yeah. So experts say one of the hardest things a child can endure is trauma from your primary caregiver.
Mhm.
So a physical abuse from somebody who you're supposed to trust to take care of you is one of the hardest things that a child can experience because a child's brain is still developing.
Yep.
And so the effects that physical trauma can do on a developing brain can actually rewire it. And so your brain is a lot might be a lot different than somebody who didn't experience that
Mhm.
because you're in survival mode. You're in Dr. Nadine Harris is a famous pediatrician who focuses on adverse childhood experiences.
Mhm.
And she gives this beautiful way, like analogy. I mean, it's a hard analogy, but it's a good way to explain it on we're all given this fight or flight natural
Mhm.
experience or like natural way because sometimes you do have to be in survival mode of like if you come across she explains that if you come across a bear
Yeah.
you need to be able to know, do I fight or do I flight? I need to do something here.
Right.
And that's supposed to happen like maybe once in your lifetime or a few times or no times. But imagine if that bear comes home every night,
Mhm.
or you're going home to that bear every day. You don't know like what you're going to experience. So you always have to be on your toes.
Yeah.
You always have to be watching.
Mhm.
You always have to be
On.
just,
Yeah.
you always have to be on, and you have to do what you need to do to survive. But then there comes a point where survival becomes so difficult to where I wanted to take my life when I was a child, and I was about to do it as a child. And
Mm.
I felt this powerful force of like, don't do this. I have something planned for your life. of these words on my heart. And it was so powerful that I didn't do it. And I'm thankful
Mhm.
because that's something that was planned for my life, is to just live loved.
Oh, goodness. I'm
And I've come to
thankful.
peace with that.
Yeah, no,
Huh?
I'm thankful for that too. I'm thankful that you're here. Certainly, I know, and I know so many of us know the warmth of your presence and your light is so graceful. So I'm glad that you're here for sure. And my hope is that also that message resonates. I know there are other people who, of course, we know this, like there are other people who are feeling these pains and these pressures, and there is hope, you know,
Hmm.
there is hope. And this is such a good telling of that hope.
Yeah, there's a lot of hope of just like, even though I experienced things that were hard with my mom,
Hmm.
I can link it back to depression and anxiety with her, of things that she went through. And so there's hope for our relationship, of just having compassion
Hmm.
for her and knowing that she did the best she could. I love reconciliation. So her and I do have a relationship. We do talk on the phone. She's in Alaska.
Hmm.
And we do talk on the phone. We just have a lot of boundaries.
Hmm.
And so I'm not a person that believes in just cutting people out of life.
Hmm.
I believe that there can be reconciliation most of the time, or at least respect for one another if there's a lot of boundaries,
Hmm.
because she deserves healing just as much as I do. And so do my siblings.
Hmm.
Yeah. It's not just my recovery journey, it's everybody's recovery journey.
Yeah, I love that. What a great message. My goodness. Strategies. You've pulled yourself through so much. What are some of the strategies that you found most effective for maintaining your sobriety and maintaining balancing through, yourself through the triggers that you experience as well?
I just want to mention that I'm not 100% like sober from alcohol, because, and this is my story.
Mhm.
So since my coping mechanism was due to trauma,
Mhm.
and I'm able to really turn those open wounds, or like I worked on those open wounds becoming bruises,
Mhm.
I'm able to like enjoy, an alcohol beverage every now and then, but I only limit myself to one.
Mhm.
So that is something that I do, is like practice self-discipline. And I will not drink any alcohol beverages if I'm triggered or have any flashbacks.
Mhm.
I'm not 100% sober, but I do practice sobriety in the way of like ordering mocktails if I'm out for a social event, because I know very easily I'm tempted to go back into a binge drinking night. And I don't like who I become
Mhm.
if I have more than one.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. So what helps you with that? What helps you maintain that? I mean, you've got set rules, you're disciplining yourself. Oftentimes we feel like that discipline is hard to maintain for a lot of people. So how do you do it? What are your tools?
Running is a big one. So, especially early in the stages, I used to like smoke a pack of cigarettes a day and, drink at night. But like with running, if you're trying to like run 3 or 4 miles the next day, smoking the day before or drinking heavily the day before makes that really, really difficult.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, running really helps. Like, so having these healthy outlets and things to look forward to, and also like reflection. So, whenever I am triggered or have a flashback,
Mhm.
I do that healthy cry. I let my husband know, like, right away, like, hey, there's something going on in my brain. It feels very messy in here. I don't know what's going on. I need to like cry, and then I need to do reflection to figure out what's going on. And he gives me space to do that. He'll take the kids like on a walk or whatever. And then I also do things like, before I go to bed, I meditate on what happened that day and think of things that brought me joy,
Mhm.
and things, and try to like remember something that brought joy to my kids and that they're healthy and they're safe. I don't know. I'm like most joyful
Mhm.
when I see kids happy.
I love it. Yeah.
And I think that has a lot to do with me not being able to have that space so much as a child.
Yeah.
And so when I see kids around me, not just my kids, like thriving,
Mm-hmm.
you will see the biggest smile come out of my face. And like, I just love wanting to be like an auntie
Mm-hmm.
in the community. Like that's healing to me is like in my recovery journey, like those healthy strategies that we talk about is just like they're daily simple things
Mm-hmm.
of seeing children happy, of me having a clean house because growing up in poverty and my mom with depression, if a meal was made, there might be like leftovers and stuff all over the dishes and maggots and like all of these things. And like we didn't have running water. So like our bathtub was always full of water. So we would have to take showers in dirty water and like empty it out by a bucket and throw it out the the back door, or like there'd be holes in the floor, which meant there were cockroaches and all these things. So like the healthy strategies in coping is going grocery shopping
Mm-hmm.
and having money in my account to be able to do that. And then going home and organizing the fridge and watching my children enjoy
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
food. And then also like cleaning up after meals and looking at a clean kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that was like something my husband and I like had to explore because like he's like, we're gonna be late to church. And I was like, I have to clean the kitchen. And he's like, it's not dirty. And I'm like, there's a few dishes. So we had to talk through it. And I'm like, Hans, I really think this stems from those experiences I had as a child. So please just let me do these dishes quick and we'll be all ready for church and it'll be great. Just like communicating with him has really helped our relationship and him knowing and being understanding of like how we do
Oh
things.
my goodness. Yeah, I mean, you're hitting it, right? Rigorous authenticity, honesty, and then open communication. So important, so vital. Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned adolescence, and I know you do a lot of work with the Christian faith, and you have a role as a deaconess, right? So
Yes.
let's hear about that a little bit more if you're willing to share. How do you use your faith and your role as part of not only your own recovery, but also support for others?
Yeah. I think just like sharing my story,
Hmm.
everybody has something they're recovering from, like you said earlier, of just like really just trying to show compassion for people.
Hmm.
And I have this energy where I just like need to be myself.
Yeah.
And I think like the Christian role in that is just like letting people know that they are loved and they are seen and they are valued and they were created for a purpose. And that purpose is to just simply be loved.
Mm.
If we just go through life and know that we were created to be loved, everything else I think will overflow from that. Like we don't have to strive for all of these things. Yeah, there's good things that we're doing and good work we're doing because we're all a community and we want to be positive and help each other and be good helpers with each other. Man, if we just know how loved we are, we can love others really well and this world could have more wellness.
Hmm.
And when darkness comes, then if we like tell it no and like stand up and be like, not today, like
Yeah.
I'm loved. I don't need to try to have all these other idols in my life that's trying to steal my attention. Like, no, I'm loved. I'm created to be loved and to love others. And I liked sharing my story and like doing these other things. But then, like, I have a role as a deaconess in the church where that's primarily focused on just like pretty much like helping with Sateo community, which is for survivors of human trafficking here in Madison. So residential homes are being built to give a space for women and their children who have experienced human trafficking. They can go and receive this like 18-month program where they're safe and they're able to get away from their traffickers.
Hmm.
I have a huge heart for women who might experience intergenerational trauma, historical trauma, and any type of trauma where it's trickled down to poverty and like all of these things where it's trickled down to where now they're put in a position where they don't have privilege or opportunities that were presented to them and they're put in this position where the only like opportunity or whatever would be like selling
Mhm.
their bodies, or they were like groomed into prostitution or anything like that. And so they're just like vulnerable and taken advantage of. I have a huge heart for women who might have been seeking love in all the wrong places, like I was, and they just need to feel love from the creator and also love from a community who's coming around them and saying, like, we're going to hold your hand and we're going to fight this darkness together.
Mhm.
And you're a cycle breaker and you're strong and you're resilient. And this is not the way your life needs to be. I'm going to join with you and we're going to get our hands dirty and we're going to figure out what to do next
I love
together. You're not doing this alone.
Yeah, yeah. Let's get our hands dirty and let's do this. Yeah, I love that. That's so great. Oh my goodness. So I want to expand on that thought as well. Intergenerational trauma and the indigenous communities. What does that look like? What's obviously you've experienced it, but I think for our audience, it might be good to expand also a little bit more on what that is and how it manifests with our indigenous communities.
Intergenerational trauma is when trauma is passed down from generation to generation. And it can be from the historical trauma of colonialism, of introducing violence in family settings and everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then also with the residential schools is part of the historical trauma of, if you have somebody who's been in a residential school and they had all this violence of physical and sexual and all these other types of violences done to them, that biologically, I mean, they were children,
Yeah.
that biologically affects them. And then that's passed down biologically and behavior wise to the next generation.
Mm-hmm.
And even if it wasn't residential schools that happen, it still goes back further and further of being saying, hey, you can't have this land anymore. We're going to put you on this land that has a lack of resources, because that's most reservations, is like they were given the land that has a lack of resources, and you're going to have to learn to survive, and you can't have access to any of these other resources. So something that intergenerational trauma is just like done by poverty,
Yeah.
violence, and so it's turning to alcohol and substances and things that were introduced into the indigenous communities
Mm-hmm.
on how to cope, and also food. So like there's all this health crisis in the indigenous community of trauma with food, of just like
Yeah.
we have indigenous people dying really young from diabetes and all of these things because that was the only access that they had at that time to that food
Mm-hmm.
that isn't natural. So like for Alaskan natives, what's very natural for us to eat is like salmon and berries and things like that, not heavy carbs and stuff like that. We have this health crisis happening in indigenous communities where we're watching our caregivers die early. And that's intergenerational trauma too, because then we have kids going into the foster
Right.
care system. And like it just like all stems together in this, everything works together. And so it's just trauma passed down from each generation. And there's a quote that says generational trauma, I think it says like generational trauma will continue until somebody starts to feel.
Mm.
I felt in my story that's been very accurate, of like that trauma keeps passing down to each generation until a generation says, I'm going to actually stop and feel this pain and stop trying to numb it
Mm-hmm.
with all these other things like alcohol and gambling and like, anything that we can get our hands on to try to numb that pain. And so I strongly feel that's what I've done, is as a cycle breaker, is I'm stopping and I'm allowing myself to feel
Mm-hmm.
the hurt, and I'm lamenting and I'm crying it out,
Yeah.
and I'm doing the healing and the work so that my daughters, they don't have to feel that as much. Sure, things are externally are going to come and it's going to affect them,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not passing that dirty water on to them. Their water is a lot more clear,
Yeah.
and they're drinking that clearer water. and I'm helping them learn when hard times do come. These are ways that have helped me, and you might have other ways, and that's okay.
Mhm.
But what's really important is that there's more things that are helpful. Like I just told my daughter the other day, I look around and I see so many people with frown wrinkles instead of smile wrinkles.
Mhm.
And like that makes me sad. What is medicine? Indigenous communities define medicine in different ways. Like colonialism measures medicine in just a pill form, but indigenous practices are things that are medicine are like laughter, connecting with nature,
Mm.
dancing. When things get really tough in my house and there's just this wave of sadness, we turn on powwow music in the kitchen and we all start dancing. I let my hair down. I
I
let it just flow and I dance and I say, okay, and my daughter, she's a teenager. She's just like a little bit like, oh, I don't know if I like want to do this like in front of everybody. So I'm just like, everybody close your eyes and just let loose,
Mhm.
and everybody just lets loose and lets all that energy out, and we're dancing to the beat of a drum, which the beat of the drum is a symbol of a beating heart.
Mhm.
And so we're just letting loose and we're having fun in the kitchen, and that joy comes back. And it's simple things like that that can help restore and get our minds off of ourselves and more on just like being loved,
Being back to
just like having fun.
yeah, coming back to love. What a good
Mhm.
cathartic and so true, such a cathartic exercise and tool for sure. Are there other traditional practices or beliefs that you like to emphasize or you've seen community members utilize that works well as well?
Yeah. So with the Indigenous community, there is this like pool to have more addictions with substances. Something that like my brother, my older brother, he grows CBD
Mm,
and he teaches like the Indigenous communities in Minnesota and Wisconsin how to grow their own CBD, like their own hemp, and then turn it into CBD and stuff. So that's been like an alternative form of medicine that we use in our communities. Not everybody, I don't want to speak for everybody, but some.
okay.
And it's just an alternative because it doesn't, I mean, research has shown that it doesn't have that addictive pull to it.
Mhm.
And it's something that like I've used. So like I've had a few miscarriages
Mm,
and those come with a lot of physical pain. I stay away from pain pills because I'm nervous that I'm going to be get addicted to them. So I called my brother and I asked him about it. Or I was like telling him the situation. He's like, oh, I'll be over in like 10 minutes. And he brought me this CBD ointment
mhm.
and I was able to apply it in the places that it was hurting and it like helped relieve some of that pain. So like that's an alternative medicine of a more natural
Mhm.
way. And yeah, I think just trying to think of like other things that are medicine, reflection, powwows,
Mhm.
music,
Mhm.
and something that I'm practicing right now is being present, which is extremely hard for me because when you grow up with like trauma, or not even just childhood, but even as adult, there's dissociation
Yeah.
that can happen. That is just like such a hard thing because like dissociation is when your brain pretty much just like says, I can't handle what's going on right now.
Mhm.
So I'm just going to kind of not be here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's like an example of that would be like, you know, a trauma I face is like when I'm being physically abused, I would just like it felt like I wasn't really there. And it's a protective mechanism
Mhm.
to not be able to feel that pain. And that's physically traumatizing your body.
Mhm.
And so when that happens constantly, for me as a child, went into adulthood. And then I wasn't able to concentrate in high school. So I didn't make good grades. And I would dissociate a lot
Yeah.
during lectures and stuff like that. There was like learning disabilities and stuff like that that was happening with me because like I was never able to fully concentrate on what was going on. And so I always felt stupid And then
Oh,
when I was told I was stupid, I was just like, I'm never going to like be smart like everybody else. And so
yeah.
when I moved here when I was 15, I graduated high school 2 years later because I was also a teenage mom. When I knew I was going to be a cycle breaker, I knew that like school would give me an opportunity to be taken seriously because as a woman of color, it's also really hard to be taken seriously and even as a woman. So like
Mhm,
education is like an opportunity that I'm able to be taken a little bit more seriously. But my anti energy really doesn't give me the ability to be taken seriously. A lot of people want reserved and like all of these things.
mhm,
But things are changing, and my church saw me as a woman who could be a leader. Like, I didn't ask for that. And when they asked me, I was like, no, I don't think so. Like,
mhm,
that's not. And so, like, I don't think I can do that. And they were like, no, you love people and you know you're loved and these things. And so that was really helpful. But like going back to dissociation, sorry, I like went on a
it's
tangent.
good, good. It's
Um,
good.
dissociation is just like it made it hard to learn in school. So
Yeah.
I had to take 6 non-credited courses when I got into my program before I could even, or like when I got into the school before I could even take credited courses. And so the odds were completely against me. And I would dissociate a lot during
Mm,
classes in college, but I kept trying and I kept practicing and practicing and practicing. And over 10 years, I've been able to get to a point now in the past couple months where I'm not dissociating a lot, but now I can't listen to a podcast and work at the same time because I've practiced this over and over
yeah.
of being present.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I used to be able to listen to podcasts and work at the same time, but like I can't do that anymore because it's too much.
Mhm.
It's because I've been practicing this over, and I think that's good.
That's a good thing. Yeah, I don't think we
It's
all
good to be.
recognize that. Yeah, no, I mean, multitasking in and of itself is stressful for the brain. And we, meaning providers, I speak as a provider right now, like we don't recommend it. We
Mhm.
want you to be more one at a time, because that forces you to be present. It allows your brain to kind of soak in more and be more reflective and all of the good things. So I love what you're saying right now. This is great. Good. Okay, so you're here, you have a beautiful career, you've gone through school, you're going through more likely, it sounds like, and you've built so much for yourself, and it's such a beautiful, beautiful story. And I know there's more that we definitely want to cover, so we'll have to have you back and do a part two. For today, I'd love to ask our last question, which is, what does recovery mean to you?
Yeah, recovery means a lifelong journey of healing and being present and pursue like having peace of mind and joy,
Hmm.
having smile wrinkles.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what recovery I think means to me is just like peace of mind,
Hmm.
joy.
Yeah, love it. Thank you so much, Jen. It really has been an honor to hear your story, and thank you for sharing it. And I'm excited to have you back again soon. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Mala. It's so easy talking to you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.